Hello, my name is Justin Shaw, and I'm going to be talking to you about understanding graphic design. This tutorial is going to help you understand what is graphic design and how you can build it and make it on a continuous basis. There's some things you need to know first, some terminology. Design, the first thing to all design is solving the problem. And if you ever get trouble with design, it's usually because you find a blank space in your design and you're trying to figure out what to put there. If it's not solving a problem, if it's not answering the question of what somebody needs, don't put anything there. Don't fill your thing with stuff that doesn't have to be there. The next part is research. Make sure that you look at things and see what other people have done about the exact same thing. If you leave this out, there's nothing like doing a ton of work and designing a toothbrush that has floss in it and realizing that people have been making them for decades and you didn't actually have to figure out any of those problems. In fact, you could have been doing something else because you'd been designing something that had been out forever. Then what you do is once you come up with some good ideas, you test your solutions. You see if any of them work and you keep them. Once you get a good solution, you go to iteration. Iteration is where you try dozens or maybe hundreds of different tries because your first one's never going to be your best. So what you do is you try lots and lots of different solutions, and if you just keep trying, if I ask you to draw a character, you draw him one time, you think that's your best one. But if you drew him 100 more times, you know your 100th one would be your best one. But in graphic design, people almost always just stick with their first idea and they just go with it. But once you get enough good ideas, you go to condensation, and that's where you take all your ideas and you pour them into one big thing, and you just use those ideas, pick the best parts from each of them, and you make a giant monster out of them. The next part I'm going to be explaining as we go. Art styles, supporting elements, pictures, colors, typography, alignment, and the grid. These create graphic design. There's more terminology, but I hope this tutorial will explain a little more. I'm going to start with a type of grid called equidistant. Equidistant is just a set of grid lines laid out that are evenly spaced, both horizontal and vertically. The red line is called your bleed margin. You don't want anything to go past that because it might get cut off by the printer or anything. You want to keep your information in the middle of this. The first thing I do is I start off with a sketch. I turn my grid down and I draw myself a sketch of what I want to do. And whenever I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, I just go to a layer. And I know that if a couple of things, that if I draw any box in this, in any shape, say I want to put an element here. I know that this box, whatever I put in here, will work. And if I want to put another box, say this is a picture of a bunch of family people and they're all being family, and I want to put a text box explaining what's going on in this picture. Well, I can just draw a box here, make it follow a little closer. And you see I'm already starting to get some professional. I'm going to put a bold type here on this line, and I'm going to put some minor text here, and say I want to put a little picture explaining it. Brown cat. Well, now I need some links. I need to put something in here that shows people where to go. Well, I can put a strip going here. Home, selection. I can go in, and if I put my typography on these lines, home, gallery, links, everything, it'll all line up. And if I want to find out exactly a box to put it in, I can just go, it's going to go here, it's going to go here, it's going to go here, here. I need to put a logo somewhere. Well, I just asked myself, I don't want to put it up here, but what if I put it in here? Say I need to put more type. Bold text. Say I've got a big picture that I want to put things in. I want to make sure everything aligns with itself. See, things don't always have to align, but if you can, you want to try because it'll make things look better. But say I want to do this, and I want to put type inside this really big type. Well, you can realize that if I put a safety margin inside this box, say like this, anything I put in here will be fine. I center inside this. Well, so I know not to put type like this, home. I don't want it to touch that edge because it looks gross. So if I just center it inside this box, inside the safety margin, so I just imagine that there's a safety margin around every single box inside of here, and if I keep my text from going too far into that safety margin, Do you see how everything starts to look really good and really professional without an incredible amount of work? And say I want something to go behind all this. I can just do something like this. And do you see how well graphic design just starts to build on itself without a whole lot of work? These grids save you a lot of time. And say I need something, but I need it to be not quite on the grid. Well, if you've drawn your grid right, your grid can have pieces that are halfway between each one. And so if I need to make a box of a certain size that's a little smaller, then by dividing these in half, I have a box here that's even smaller. So if I need to put a box inside this, technically I can go 50% in between all of these if I've drawn my grid right, and I've got a box that's going to line up with other boxes inside it. Generally, you want to stick with the grid and make sure everything aligns. Now once I've got my sketch and I figured things out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start trying to come up with a feeling and an art style. An art style tells me what the company's trying to produce. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to show you guys some things that I did. This is my final website. It's not a website, it's just a piece of graphic design. And I tried not to have too much of ideas. I wanted to make sure that it was simple and straightforward. Turn this off real quick. And I'm going to show you how I came to, if you see the art style over here, it's designed to make you feel fantastical. So I chose purples and pinks and colors that had high contrast to create a lot of vibrancy, to make you feel like they're powerful and interesting. Now I'm going to go through and show you, I built this and I just sprayed some purple and I slowly went with a light brush until I got lighter, and then I got white, and then I dragged it with the smear tool. As I went on, I started to play more and more with making selections and adding colors. I'm trying to use colors that have a lot of energy to them. Colors that feel powerful and interesting. And I just played with them. Just in Photoshop, messing around, seeing what I could come up with. Seeing what led me to the feeling of a fantasy world, something that was powerful and interesting. And just with a little bit of play, I was able to come up with a couple of solutions. And the solution I came up with was this one. You see, whenever I'm using type, do you see how it's large type, smaller type, then much smaller type? And you see how it's perfectly, everything is right aligned, left aligned? You don't want it to be centered. Centered is something amateur graphic designers use all the time. And if do you see these supporting elements? All these elements feel like they're part of the same universe. So whenever I use one of them anywhere, like in this graphic design, see I've used them here, they're part of the logo, these things feel like they're together. And you see I use pictures that look good. I try to make sure everything aligns with everything. The black line aligns with this, everything, this aligns with this. You see how this matches inside? And I tried to use some supporting elements to build websites that feel good. And whenever you're trying to find distance between certain things, you can use, there's this green cube that I use, and on a grid, if I need something to be a certain distance away from something else, I can always test it to see if is it a pixel away from there or here. So whenever a website's on, you can just move this thing around and say this distance and 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 this distance. Do you see how this cube helps me remind myself? And the more closely you make sure that your stuff matches the grid, the better your stuff's going to come out. So now we've looked at equidistance. Equidistant is just this basic equally distant spacing out. And bigger grids and smaller grids, it can really just depend on your point of view. Now I'm going to go to a grid called Subdivision. And Subdivision is, if you see this, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 across and 6 down. They're a line that each line has been divided by a certain amount, the same exact amount. You see how this square is the same as this square, is this distance, is this distance, but it's still got the bleed margin. Things like this can actually give me a pretty nice piece of graphic design, because the subdivision, as I lay it out, and the thing is with all of these grids, if you feel like it's not working for you, all you need to do is just divide it again. Just break these up into smaller grids so that you have more points. Subdivision just helps give these interesting spaces that make things different. Once I've got my actual sketch done and I figured out where I want things, I'm going to go through and start placing elements. I try to create a color scheme. This is for a kids game. Do you see how the color scheme is very childlike? It's got a lot of smart colors that aren't so vibrant they're punching you in the face. It's got interesting features that meet you, and I've reused lots of things. I use this childlike type to build pieces. I've used the same art style, a square world, to build pieces. I've used lots of pictures. And you see how the pictures have this line between them? That's part of the art style. Same with the planet. And you see how I use big text, little text, block text? Let's see. As I come through, there we go. When I started building the art style, what I wanted to do is create this thing called a cube world. That was my idea, just some sort of kid's idea that gave me a kind of a interesting piece to work with. I tried to make it very childlike, just a cube, light, medium, and dark side with some colors. Made a couple other cube worlds, put some type on there, played around with it a little bit. I tried an even simpler piece of graphic design for the logo, laying out pictures, trying to change their direction, seeing what I could do to make something work. And this subdivision, I find, makes an interesting set. And most people will use a combination of all of these different grids, not all at the same time. Like I'm going to show you hexagonal, and you see how hexagonal goes at these weird, strange angles? Well, the thing with hexagonal is that you can make, with this grid, a flat grid. See, if I need that, I could just start connecting these points. Or say that I want a grid that's not quite at this angle because that's too steep. One point to another point. So if I go here to here, do you see how now I have a grid that's on a slight turn, slight corner? This grid gives me a lot more options, and sometimes people use it just for more help. As I'm going through it, I go through my sketch. I'm trying to bend this website as much as possible so you can see it in a way that you usually don't warp things this much, but it can be a lot of fun. And so this is something, it's not for amateurs, something that you can see and do. And you see how I still have my bleed margin? Once I've got my sketch, I'm going to go through, I've designed it, laid it out, I've put it into its pieces, you turn that down, and you see big text, little text, block text. My art style, explanations, logos are in spaces, information, good pictures, supporting elements, and the only way to really do this is just to continuously do it. Pick an assignment, pick a company, make a website for them, make a handout for them, make a business card. Continuously doing graphic design is what's really going to give you the stuff you're looking for. And your art styles, like this is something I was playing with for this. It's serious but not so serious, kind of strange, kind of a brainy coral. Played with the coral brain to look a little more strange type of look, because this art style stuff is what's going to get you started. See how this is stupid, but it turns out looking nice as you go on. See, these are really easy. Anybody can make these. And this is what I turn them into. You see, I cut them into strips so that they feel like art, and these things support and make all your graphic design hold together. So that whenever you do something, you do have a website that's done and it's interesting. It's here. See how that art, it just holds the piece together just a little bit. I'm going to get to the very last one, and I'm going to get to Fibonacci. Fibonacci is 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 plus 1 equals 3. It's boxes of continuously growing size, and as they grow, it makes this interesting conical pattern. If I lay it out, see, 1 box plus 1 box gives me 2 boxes. 2 boxes plus 1 box gives us 3 boxes. 3 plus 2 gives me 5. 5 plus 3 equals 8. This type of grid, this is one way to lay this out. You see how this plus this equals this space. 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 What I'm going to do is I'm going to surround it. I just went up and did the same thing. So you see now I have smaller to bigger, and did the same thing here all the way across. You see how this grid gives me an interesting set of grids where things get smaller towards the edges and bigger towards the middle. This is what I came up with that design. Do you see as things get smaller towards the edges? And it also gives me the size and width of all of these different sizes. Because if I come in through here, Turn that back down. How big do I make a shape in here? Well, I can make a bar, and it can be, turn that up a little bit, it can be this thick, and it can have stuff in it from here to here, and it can have type in it here, or it can have type in it here, and I want to put a picture in here, and so I'm just going to go picture, let's do it here. Picture, type, logo, type, and I'm going to put a picture in here. In fact, I'm going to put a picture here and a picture here, and I'm going to put big type here, here, big type here, type here, type here. Do you see how if I lay out on this logo, I get more and more interesting shapes, and if I want to put a strip behind something, I can say it's, maybe it's this thick is a color strip, maybe it's this big, but I don't have to guess. And you see how there's a thickness from here to here? Well, if I want to make a strip somewhere and I need to know how thick it needs to be, I can just do this. I can just move this anywhere on here, and as long as it's attached to the grid, because the grid isn't God, it just helps you. So if I want to strip behind all this, it's as easy as doing that. Say a strip of color or something. So whenever you're coming in and building your piece, do you see how all of these things are just strips moved around and played with? You're just playing the move around box game and figuring out exactly what you need to be there so that you can do it. See the supporting elements, the diagonal lines put in at several different places, the lines that have similar colors. I've got one color scheme. It's only got 4 colors, yellow, this deep brown, black. I've got white, and then I've got 2 shades of gray, medium gray, light gray. And I design everything with those things in mind. I make sure I get good pictures, everything's aligned, and in shapes. The last part for graphic design, what does it take to make Mickey Mouse? If I take away his nose, his mouth, his eyes, is he still Mickey Mouse? What if I just do this? Make sure that your graphic design, don't add anything that doesn't need to be there. I mean, occasionally you do it just for some panache, something to look good, but remember, design is not how much you can add, it's how much you can take away. If you're not solving a problem, don't just decorate to decorate. I mean, if you do make it look better, maybe, I mean, there's always going to be supporting elements that add a little bit of, something that looks good. But just remember, simplify. Don't overdo it. Don't fill in every empty space. And it should be pretty easy to take on. I hope that you've understood something about design, learned something new about it, and hope these types of grids can help you. Have a good one.